Hello and welcome to this NCFE provider session on a guide to compliance. My name is Charmaine Phelps and I am a provider development officer here at NCFE. It is my role to support centres through the planning, onboarding and CPD process for NCFE qualifications, focusing specifically on functional skills. Please note that for questions, we'll be taking questions towards the end, so feel free to pop the questions into the question box, but I won't be answering any of those until we come to the end of the session. And the slides are in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. So the objective of the session is to explore the delivery of assessments in compliance with the regulations. We'll look at controlled assessments, external assessments, and look at invigilation. We'll look at scenarios where you'll get the chance to be interactive and decide whether or not certain scenarios are compliant with the regulations. We'll be using the polls feature within GoToWebinar for that. Then we'll end with a short summary and then guide you towards the support that is available to you. So we'll begin with the controlled assessments. All of our entry-level assessments for maths, reading and writing are controlled assessments. So you'll see them all here and you've got the web page which takes you directly to the qualification page on the website. Controlled assessment is a form of internal assessment in which control levels are set for each stage of the assessment process. So that's task setting, task taking, task marking. With task setting, this is medium control. NCFE's functional skills controlled assessment tasks are set by NCFE following the requirements in the qualification and skills criteria. For the task taking, that is high control. NCFE's functional skills controlled assessments must be undertaken in controlled, supervised conditions. That's supervised for controlled assessments, not invigilated. Learners must be formally supervised at all times during their assessments. Centres must use the controlled assessment tasks set by NCFE when assessing learners. If a resit is required, a different assessment must be attempted. It is possible to apply to contextualise writing and maths assessments at entry level. The scenarios provided may be amended to use alternative source materials relevant to learners. For example, where a menu is used, centres could replace the given menu with one from a local cafe or coffee shop. However, the parameters and requirements of the tasks must not be altered by contextualisation. If using a context and/or source materials other than those given by NCFE, the materials and any information contained within must be familiar to the learner and use appropriate language. The task must be approved by NCFE before use with learners using our request for contextualisation of functional skills controlled assessments form on the NCFE website. For task marking, there is medium control. NCFE's functional skills controlled assessments allow centres to mark the controlled assessment. Assessments must be marked using the mark schemes provided by NCFE. Assessment decisions will be checked and confirmed by the centre's internal quality assurer, which we abbreviate to IQA, and NCFE's external quality assurer, which we abbreviate to EQA. The assessor must record each assessment decision and the justification for the decision on the assessment front sheet. To find the regulations for the assessment of controlled assessments, you can either use the link from each of the qualification pages, or if you go to qualifications, assessment support, and then skip along to here, you'll find the assessment regulations tab there. And then once you go to that page, and obviously it is hyperlinked on this slide, so you'll have all the links from here as well, but it's useful to know how to navigate the NCFE website. You can then find the regulations for the conduct of controlled assessments. It's important to read the download direct from the internet rather than make printed copies, as printed copies are not subject to version control. Now, for this session today, we were tempted about whether to put the regulations into the handout section for you or to email them to you, but for the reason that anything I send to you is not going to be subject to version control, I prefer to just leave it with the links. And again, for this session, we were thinking, well, shall we go through the different regulations and pull out the most important parts? But again, there is the risk with that if we are giving you the regulations in brief, it is possible that we miss out something that's important that then leads to non-compliance. So rather than us using this session to go through the regulations, either these regulations or for the external assessments in brief, you are still required, if you're taking part in the assessments in any way, you're still required to read those in full. So this is what the regulations cover, the regulations for the conduct of controlled assessments. So it covers preparing for assessments, administering the assessments, and also post-assessments. If anybody does have any questions related to the controlled assessments that you would like answered in this session, please let us know in the chat and we'll answer either at the end of the session or in a follow-up email. And please note, these regulations are only applicable to maths at entry level and English reading and writing. To ensure the regulations are correctly applied, they should be read and referred to by the head of centre, chief officer of an institution or chief executive of a company. They should also be read by members of the senior leadership team, the examinations officer or quality assurance coordinator appointed by the head of centre. So that's the designated person. They should also be read by the curriculum manager and the course tutor responsible for learners undertaking the assessments, and all tutors, teachers or assessors delivering NCFE qualifications. So basically everybody needs to read the regulations. We're now going to turn to external assessments. So reading, writing and maths at level 1 and level 2 are all assessed externally. So that basically means that NCFE mark the assessments. These qualifications are invigilated rather than supervised, which means that the teachers cannot be the invigilator. You'll find the regulations linked within the supplementary booking document. And please also refer to the qualification specific instructions for delivery. So these are all from the same drop down as previously, where you go to qualifications, assessment support, and then skip across to the regulations. And from the regulations page, you will also find the invigilation training presentation that you can use to train up invigilators. The booking document, so that's this one here, the Functional Skills Supplementary Booking Document. The booking document covers booking assessments, transportation of papers, what to do during an assessment, return of papers, and results release. The link in the introduction here takes you to the JCQ ICE document that must be followed for our external functional skills assessments. The JCQ ICE document is followed by other awarding organisations. So if you've switched to NCFE from another awarding organisation, you should already be familiar with these regulations. So it's the same regulations ultimately across different awarding organisations, and any differences when it comes to making bookings, that type of thing, they are all covered within that booking document. The QSID, or Qualification Specific Instructions for Delivery document, contains information such as whether dictionaries or the internet is allowed for assessments, and also the type of assessment and any resource requirements. For example, a calculator, ruler, protractor, and a pair of compasses for level 2 maths assessments. So we're going to go straight now to the scenarios, and these are typical scenarios that our compliance team have come across, and we'd like you to tell us whether or not the actions taken by the centre comply with our regulations. So, our first scenario. Josh is head of centre at a private training company, and he employs an assessor, a teacher, and an administration assistant. So it's quite a small centre, but it's quite typical. He assigns himself as the designated person on the EQA report. Does this comply with the regulations? And I'm going to put that as a poll, and it'll come up. And any of you some of you may just know the answer to this. Some of you may have the regulations open and can find the answer. And others of you may be completely unsure, but that's fine. That's why you're here today. So we're getting the results through. I've got just a little over half of you have voted, and we're quite split. We are very split on whether or not this complies with the regulations. And this is part of the reason we're doing this session. And if after doing this session, you think to yourself, crumbs, I didn't get any of those right, then the solution to that is read the regulations. And there is no shortcut, although I could sort of pull out the important points for you. For the purposes explained before, it would be too risky for me to do that. So the majority of you have voted. So I'm going to close that and share it. And ultimately, even before I share the answers with you, you should be able to see that on the screen. So we've got 48% saying yes, 26% saying no, 26% saying unsure. So ultimately, it's, you know, a good proportion of you are, well, the majority of you are wrong or unsure is the truth here. So I'll hide that away. I'll hide that away and then move on. So does this comply with the regulations? No. The head of centre, and this is one of the first things that comes up within the regulations, the head of centre cannot be the designated person. He can appoint anybody, or she, but in this case it's Josh, so we're talking about a he. So Josh can appoint anybody other than himself. So a more suitable person may be the administration assistant. This is a scenario that does come up quite often for our compliance team to investigate. So well done to the 26% of you who said no. And I'm very pleased that all of you who said yes and were unsure are here today, so that you can make sure that you go back to the regulations and read everything in full. So we'll look at the next scenario. So scenario 2. Jenny has a group of 6 entry-level learners. She books 2 learners for an entry level 3 assessment because they're ready to sit it. On the day, she decides to give the full class the assessment. Of the 6 learners, the booked to pass as well as to others. So obviously when you book an entry-level assessment, the assessments are available to you straight away. You can access them from the portal. So for this particular group, the assessment was booked for 2 learners, and on the day, due to the fantastic work of the class, Jenny decides to give the whole class the assessment as well as the 2 that were booked. So does this comply with the regulations? So I'll bring that poll up. And again, it is yes, no, or unsure. And while you're voting, I know that you can't see the scenario anymore, so I'm going to read it out again. Jenny has a group of 6 entry-level learners. She books 2 learners for an entry-level 3 assessment because they're ready to sit it. On the day, she decides to give the full class the assessment. Of the 6 learners, the book 2 pass, as well as 2 others. Does this comply with the regulations? And we've got, still the votes are coming in. There's a lot of you in this session. We had over 90 book for the session, and we've got 57 in the session. So apologies for those who voted very quickly, but there are still a few left to vote. So, and I'll share so you can see. So this is quite a different vote here. So the vast majority of you, 83% said no, 6% said yes, and 10% not sure. So I'll stop sharing that, and we should be back to my slides. Does it comply with the regulations? No. So the 83% of you were correct. The EQA will sample the 2 learners who were booked, and they will discover that more learners sat the assessment. This would lead to an investigation and could lead to sanctions. All learners need to be booked on the portal and added on to the assessment tracking document for the EQA's attention. So it's very important that all of your learners are booked for those assessments. So well done. Well done to everybody who had a guess at that or knew the answer. Okay, next scenario. Elmo is an administrator and is asked to invigilate an online assessment for an employee at their workplace. Elmo has a lot of work to do and gets on with this while the assessment is taking place. They have to leave the room for a few minutes to let a delivery into the building. Does this comply with the regulations? So we've got an employer invigilating an employee's online assessment at a workplace. I'm going to open the poll. Once the poll's open, I'll read the scenario again. So Elmo is an administrator and is asked to invigilate an online assessment for an employee at their workplace. Elmo has a lot of work to do and gets on with this while the assessment is taking place. They have to leave the room for a few minutes to let a delivery into the building. Does this comply with the regulations? So we've had 80% voted. So you've come in much faster with your decision on this one. And I'll close that and share. And what can we see there? So huge majority, 98% no, 2% unsure. Nobody put yes for this particular scenario. And so I'll hide that away. And what's our answer? Well, very happy to say that 98%, well, 100% of you that voted really were correct, because the 2% were unsure. They didn't say yes. Invigilators must supervise the candidates throughout the whole time the assessment is in progress and give their complete attention to this requirement at all times. The head of centre must ensure that suitably qualified and experienced adults act as invigilators. So while it is possible for employers to invigilate at a workplace, it's only on the proviso that those invigilators have been appointed, they've been suitably qualified or experienced, and they are following the regulations. So that particular scenario, no. What about this next one, which is similar but not the same? Pauline is the manager of an apprentice. The apprentice cannot sit their assessment at the training centre, so the training provider shares the regulations with Pauline and uses the NCFE presentation to train Pauline as an invigilator. During the assessment, Pauline has several important work calls, so she speaks very, very quietly during the calls so as not to disturb the apprentice. So what about in this scenario? Does this comply with the regulations? And again, I'm going to launch the poll and I'll read it through once more whilst the poll is there. So Pauline is the manager of an apprentice. The apprentice cannot sit their assessment at the training centre, so the training provider shares the regulations with her and uses the NCFE presentation to train Pauline as an invigilator. During the assessment, Pauline has several important work calls. She speaks very quietly during the calls so as not to disturb the apprentice. Does this comply with the regulations? Close that poll and share. So does scenario 4 comply with the regulations? 96% have said no, 2% have said yes, and 2% have said they are not sure. Let's show the answers. No. So the 96% of you were correct. The 2% sitting on the fence, fair dues. You know, she did read the regulations. She did receive training. But unfortunately, it's back to the same one as before. Even though she's speaking very quietly, that's not the point. Invigilators must supervise the candidates throughout the whole time the assessment is in progress and give their complete attention to this requirement at all times. I possibly should have said that in all of these scenarios, the employer is not related to the apprentice or the employee, as that is would be a conflict. So well done, and thank you to everybody who's taken part. And in that one, let's take a look at scenario 4, which again is similar, but it's not the same. Amir is the manager of an apprentice. The apprentice cannot sit their assessment at the training centre, so the training provider shares the regulations with him and uses the NCFE presentation to train Amir as an invigilator. Amir books 2 hours where he must not be disturbed in a quiet room at his workplace. He follows the regulations and invigilates the online assessment. Does this comply with the regulations? So I'll share the poll, and once more, I'm going to read out the scenario while you're voting. So Amir is the manager of an apprentice. He is not related, and the same with the others, they were not related. The apprentice cannot sit their assessment at the training centre, so the training provider shares the regulations with him and uses the NCFE presentation to train Amir as an invigilator. Amir books 2 hours where he must not be disturbed in a quiet room at his workplace. He follows the regulations and invigilates the online assessments. Does this comply with the regulations? And we've got, so let's close that off, share the responses, and a little bit more division here. So it's not as resounding, with a majority all thinking one thing. So we've got 79% yes, 15% say no, and 6% not sure. So does this comply with the regulations? Yes, an employer can invigilate if they're not related to the employee, they are appropriately trained, and follow the regulations for the duration of the assessment. And it is those points that are incredibly important. So our compliance team do deal with a lot of instances of potential maladministration of the assessments when it comes to assessments being sat at workplaces, but it is possible for an employer to invigilate, providing they are properly trained and they invigilate properly in line with the regulations. They are not disturbed. They do not do any work during that time. They do not take any calls. They do not leave the room or have anybody knocking on the door. So it is possible, providing that the regulations are followed. Look at this final scenario, scenario 6. Alex has 2 learners sitting their level 2 English writing assessments. At the end of the assessment, he realizes that the learners sat the paper that had been assigned to the other learner. When the results come through, both learners have passed. Phew. So Alex makes a note to be more careful in future and cross-reference the paper codes with the learner's name on the register. So how about this one? Does this one comply with the regulations? I will launch that one as a poll. And once that's launched, I'll read it through again. So Alex has 2 learners sitting their level 2 English writing assessments. At the end of the assessment, he realizes the learners sat the paper that had been assigned to the other learner. When the results come through, both learners have passed. So Alex makes a note to be more careful in future and cross-reference the paper codes with the learner's name on the register. Does this one comply with the regulations? And share. So 86% of you said no, 6% of you said yes, and 8% were unsure. But yes, it's not compliant. Learners must sit the paper that's been allocated to them. And this is because no learner can sit the same paper twice. Now, with this particular one, I was thinking to myself, well, how will NCFE, how will we find this out? They've both passed. So, how do we find this out? But ultimately, NCFE would know that the incorrect paper code has been provided to the learner because we have a team called Assessment Delivery, and they monitor this. They would pick this up as maladministration. That would lead to further investigating. If centre or staff member, if the centre or the staff member was found culpable of maladministration, then sanctions could be applied in accordance with JCQ guidelines, which may include written warnings, training, and special conditions. So codes and names are already printed on the papers. Good point. Yes, but it's still, so check them, double check them, make sure the person that you're handing it to you are giving it to the right person. That's a good point in the questions that come through. What would have happened if the centre had alerted NCFE as soon as they noted the error? And that is exactly the right thing to do. So in this particular case with, oh, hang on a second, let me go back to the question because I'm aware I can see it, but you guys can't. So in this particular case where we've got Alex, he realised at the end, and that is the point that he should go to the website, and there is a form there for malpractice and maladministration. He should have completed that form and let us know. Because he has then lettered us know, alerted us to this, then it will still be investigated. But because he's let us know and to explain to us what he's going to do in future to make sure that doesn't happen again. Then will any further sanctions take place? I can't say that, but I think certainly letting us know as soon as anything happens in your centre, as soon as anything happens, please let us know, because it's far better for you to let us know that something happened that shouldn't have happened. And then, yes, it'll be investigated. But the fact is, you've alerted us to it. You've identified the problem. You've told us what you're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. So it's highly unlikely that sanctions would then be put into place. But the investigation would still happen. But far better for Alex to tell us this than for us to find this out by the assessment delivery team. So in summary, please ensure that all staff involved in the assessments are fully familiar with the appropriate regulations and follow them. And please don't rely on word of mouth. This is why I'm not, giving you the regulations in brief during this session, although some of the scenarios, I suppose, will hint towards some of the parts of the regulations that routinely we have issues with. But please don't have handed on information. Go direct to the regulations. Everybody needs to read and follow them in full. This one here, the designated person cannot be the head of centre. And it's interesting that this is the one that the majority of people who were in this session did give the incorrect response to that one. So the designated person cannot be the head of centre. Do cross-reference the paper codes with the learners' names on the register. And as somebody's pointed out, actually, the learner names are now put onto the papers. So make sure you check, particularly the invigilator. And I'm guessing that the majority of you on this session might be teachers. So your invigilators who are invigilating those assessments, they don't know those learners. So make sure that when they are handing out the papers, they check what those learners' names are. You yourselves, you've got the learners' names on the papers and you know those learners, but if the invigilator doesn't know them, then they do need to check. And any invigilator that you have must be appropriately trained. So you can use our invigilation presentation and go through that with your invigilators. There are various invigilation courses, but when it comes to the qualification specification, it simply says that they must be appropriately trained or qualified. So in the example we had before, for example, an employer can be an invigilator, providing they're following the regulations and they have been appropriately trained. So any questions? I'll open up the question box now and see what we've got coming through. NCFE, what would happen if the centre had alerted NCFE? So, which I've answered. If you've got any further questions, please do pop them through. Other than that, I'm going to take you through where you can find further support. Oh, another one's just come through. Hang on. Does it need to be a qualified teacher to invigilate and mark? Oh, now that's an interesting question, actually, because there's two parts of that. So the only ones that you guys are going to be marking are the controlled assessments, which are the entry-level assessments. So the entry-level sessions are not invigilated, they're supervised. So if you're marking them or the teacher is marking them, then it's not invigilated, it's going to be supervised. And does it need to be a qualified teacher? So the teachers that you have and the assessors, so the person who marks would be the assessor, the person who invigilates is the invigilator, etc. And from the qualification specification, it says suitably or appropriately qualified and or experienced. So we have quite a lot of functional skills teachers, functional skills assessors, functional skills invigilators who may not have QTS, qualified teacher status. Let me know if that answers your question, but always refer to the staffing requirements that are within the qualification specification. Oh, somebody there answered all of those questions correctly. I'm not naming names in this session because it is recorded and it will go out. You can be very pleased with yourself. Do the learners have to bring in a form of physical ID? Also, just to clarify, an invigilator cannot get on with other work during the exam. So two things there. Absolutely, the invigilator cannot be doing other work. So they have to be, the wording is on the slides. It's they have to have their full attention has to be on the invigilation of that assessment. So if they have any work in there at all, then their full attention isn't on the assessment. And then the other one is, do the learners have to bring a form of physical ID? For the most part, you guys will, if you're in a, you will know the learners. So I don't believe it's a requirement. I have to double check on the qualification specification, but to the best of my knowledge, the answer to that is no. However, if they're sitting by remote invigilation, then they do need a form of ID to show that it is them. Do we get a badge for attending this webinar? So a certificate will go to all the attendees rather than a badge. We haven't got digital credentials for this. The presentation, the slides without the answer are all in the handout section, but I am going to send the slides out to you. Hang on, I've just lost that question. So with learners with an EHCP, lifelong diagnosis, and multiple forms of evidence regarding their difficulties, do we still need to appoint a qualified access arrangement assessor, or can we follow the NCFE guidelines in access arrangements and apply this with just the SENCO? So when it comes to the access arrangements, please refer to the policy and guidance on reasonable adjustments, which has the information on there. So and you've just clarified that, so that's at entry level. So it needs to be usually a SENCO. If you're a school or a college and you've got a SENCO, then your SENCO should be able to provide the evidence, and you don't need to like send that or post that to us or anything. You need to have it at your centre. You put the learner is eligible for reasonable adjustments and what those particular timings might be in the portal. So it's quite a sort of straightforward ticky box thing, and then you will have the evidence at your centre. So particularly, if your learners have got the HCP, lifelong diagnosis, etc., you will have all of that evidence there at your centre. And if the EQA should request it, then you'll have it there. I record on the appropriate form. It's just I do not have the specific qualification. So obviously you don't. Are you a SENCO? The person who's asking this question. Yes, you're a SENCO. Just who's jumped through to pay someone else to confirm it. If you're a SENCO and that person has those, various medical diagnoses, obviously you can't give them a medical diagnosis. So I can't see why we'd be asking you to jump through an extra hoop and pay somebody else to confirm it. But okay, right. But based on please refer to the. Let me just see if I can open up a. I'm just going to pause my sharing because I'll open up. As with anything, it's always really, really important to refer directly to whatever it says on our website. So for this particular, So you should see the NCFE website. So for reasonable adjustments, go to the qualifications drop down and it'll be assessment support. And we've got access arrangements, reasonable adjustments and paper modifications. So whatever it says on this guidance document here, guidance on applying access arrangements and reasonable adjustments, this is what you must do. Yeah, if you're a SENCO, extra time, so non-centre debt, prior notification to NCFE. Ultimately go through there. So if they've got their statement, you've already said they've got their EHCP, then all you need to do is let us know in the portal that that is the case, and then that you have the evidence there at your centre. It sounds like your belief may have been that we were, or you believed that we needed somebody to sort of put all of the evidence together for you, but there's certainly no need to do that. If I haven't answered your question properly, please feel free to contact me at the end of this session, and you know, we can go through that. But it says the SENCO's detailed information as above must be supported by confirmation of the learner's disability. So they do need to have the various, you know, the diagnosis or the letter or the report from the local authority. But it sounds to me, from what you're saying, that your learners have all of this. So it's the SENCO's detailed information supported by this here. Okay, so I'll go back to my session and show you where you can find the support available. All registrations are made on the portal. There's the portal user guide, and we've also made a recording for the portal for functional skills, so you can access both of those. For online assessments, you must first register to take online assessments from the online assessments page. Please refer to the technical specification and the user guides, which you will find on this page. And we've made a recording for Surpass online assessments. This recording is particularly helpful if you have got invigilators invigilating online assessments, you know, so things like how to pause the assessment or what to do if there's an issue, you know, how they can see in real time, you know, how their learners are getting on, you know, and it is possible to sit the online assessments offline if you know that your centre has particularly poor Wi-Fi, for example. So there's lots of guidance here and also in this recording. All of the regulations are here. So you've got the page where you'll find everything, and then broken down. And then in addition, and I've not spoken about the SLC today at all, and that is because the SLC is no longer a controlled assessment. The SLC is an internal assessment. So you do the tasks that we have, the tasks being either, say for example at level 1 they have to do, here's your task, short talk and a discussion. What they do their short talk and discussion on is entirely, you know, for you to agree with your learners. It's very important that you share the criteria with your learners so that what they're talking about is going to, you know, enable them to meet the criteria. So you've got the guidance for assessors for entry levels and the guidance for assessors at level 1 and level 2. And again, if you've got further questions on the SLC, you can pop them into the question box and feel free to or get in touch with myself or Patricia. Patricia's more of the English specialist, whereas I'm more maths. We've also got our training and events page. So from our training and events page, you can access various on-demand events like our onboarding session, our YouTube playlist where we've got the previous CPD sessions on demand. Anything coming up in the subsequent months will be down here. And we also have, so I've popped these just for you, the links specific. We've got the IQA training and the assessor training. These events, the IQA and assessor training, are not put on by provider development. they are put on by the quality assurance team. But there's further information on our delivery support page. And if you've got, if you're quite new to delivering functional skills, and perhaps you've watched our onboarding, which we're now doing as a recording, it's on demand only. We do have every month, we've got drop-in clinics that you can come along and just ask your questions, and we'll be able to answer those for you. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been jolly nice to spend some time with you. Key contacts on this page, you've got myself. I specialise in maths and digital, and then Patricia in English and digital. Patricia apologises for not being with us this afternoon. You can contact the provider development team, and you've got your account management team, customer support. If you have got questions about the portal and Surpass, please contact customer support because Patricia and I, we don't go on the portal to find out your learners, whether you've registered them or not. We do have a little bit of ability with that, but the guys in customer support that can access your account, your learners, and find everything out for you. Skills assessment, so that's for our online platform for functional skills. There's information here as well, and we do have if you've heard of FAST, so that's functional assessments skills together. So that's a combination of our qualifications with all of the resources and with the skills assessment tools built in. And you can contact our skills assessment team or your account manager about FAST if that's something you're interested in. So just a reminder, this session has been recorded, and the link will be made available in due course. If there were any questions that I didn't get to answer or didn't answer properly perhaps, then please, you can either contact me, or if there's questions that I've missed out, I'll pop those into the email when I send the slides out. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of the late afternoon, early evening, and do take care. Oh, nice question. If you're still here, do we still have to book the SLC on the portal? No, you don't. The SLC does not need to be booked on the portal. What you do need to do is keep a track of the SLC when you did it using the assessment tracking document, and you also need to complete the learner observation and achievement record. But you do not need to book the SLC on the portal. How do we provide the achievements for the SLC element if it's no longer controlled? Is this in the portal as a simple pass or fail? Yes, is the short answer. Is there a new document to submit along with the reading and writing papers? So you do submit the learner observation and achievement record. So if you're thinking, I'm guessing that you're thinking about entry-level assessments again. So let me just go back to the website. And what I'll do is I'll keep these links open, and then I'll send the links out to everybody with the slides. So if I go to functional skills, there's some FAQs here about the SLC. I've got some entry-level FAQs here. So they just need to do the part of the task that they didn't complete. But what the documentation that you need, I'll just go to the level 2 as an example. In the assessment materials tab, you've got internal assessment guidance. You've got this is what you need to complete, the learner observation and assessment record. You need to complete the assessment tracking document, and there is an exemplar for the SLC. So you can take a look of that to see what it is that they've done. For this particular one, they did a role play, book an appointment at the hairdressers. There is also the assessor instructions and guidance, speaking, listening, and communicating. So you can open that up and take a look at that for the SLC for entry levels. When do we register learners for the qualification? Is this done as soon as they start their learning or nearer the time they're ready to sit the exam? Okay, you register the learners when you want to, but in time for them to sit the assessment. So it depends if they're sitting. A benefit of registering earlier is that you get your EQA, your external quality assurer, allocated sooner. Okay, the sooner your EQA is allocated, the sooner you can communicate with them, you can ask them questions, and you can also book in your review. And even if your review, you may be thinking, well, I'm not going to be sitting the assessments for a few months. The EQAs get booked up pretty far in advance, and if you know when you're going to be sitting your assessments, you're better off having your EQA allocated and contacting them straight away and saying, listen, we're going to be sitting our assessments mid-June. Can we book our EQA review end of June, please? And asking them that with as much notice as you possibly can is a benefit. So there is a benefit to registering early. However, some centres, for instance, if it was a pupil referral unit and you weren't sure if the learners were going to be staying at your unit or going back into a different centre, then you may want to delay the registration because you don't know if they're actually going to sit the assessment with you. Okay, so it really is entirely up to you. There's no deadline.